Good evening and welcome to syracuse.com's congressional debate between the candidates Representative John Katko and challenger Dana Balter. I'm Marie Morelli. I handle editorials and opinion for syracuse.com and the Post-Standard. And to my left is my colleague Chris Baker, public policy reporter. We're coming to you live from syracuse.com's downtown newsroom for the first of 4 debates between these candidates between now and Election Day, November 6th. Republican John Katko is a 2-term congressman, first elected in 2014. Before that, he was a federal prosecutor in the Northern District of New York. Democrat Dana Balter has worked as a visiting assistant professor at the Maxwell School at Syracuse University. She's making her first run for public office. A few words about the format tonight. We're going to forego opening statements because you probably know a lot about these candidates already, and you'll learn more as the hour goes on. Chris and I are going to ask some questions that we hope will draw out the differences between the candidates and help you decide who to vote for on November 6th. We'll give each candidate ample time to respond to questions and rebut their opponent if they want to. Dana, you won the coin toss, and so the first question goes to you. Chris.
You both offered very different visions of the impact you think last year's tax plan is having and will have on Central New Yorkers. Dana, why should Central New Yorkers oppose a tax cut that has helped lead to a booming economy, higher 401ks, and generally lower taxes?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me. Thank you, Congressman, for participating, and thank you to all of you for watching at home. I think that we are facing some difficult economic times. We have a lot of people across Central and Western New York who are really struggling to make ends meet. And there are things that are good about the way the economy is going. GDP is up. You're describing some positive things. The problem is that most folks at home are not seeing the benefits of that, and they are largely experiencing stagnant wages. So we need to focus on revitalizing the economy in a way that works for working families. And the tax bill that was passed last year with the congressman's vote instead increases economic inequality in our country and here in Central and Western New York. It gives the lion's share of the benefits to the wealthiest in this country, to millionaires and billionaires, and to corporations. And instead, what we need is a tax policy that puts at its center working families, students, seniors, veterans, people with disabilities. Those are the groups of people who need a boost in our tax policy. Unfortunately, the tax bill that the congressman voted for didn't do that. So we need to take our tax policy in a different direction.
John, your response, we've seen that the majority of the benefits of this tax cut go to the rich and to corporations, and some GOP leaders have now suggested possibly targeting Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid to pay for these. Do you think the benefits of the current economy outweigh some of those concerns?
Well, thank you for having me tonight, and I'm glad to be here with Dana and all of you out there, so thanks for watching. First and foremost, so I have to take issue with you characterizing as most of the tax cuts going to the rich. That's simply not true. My opponent has been propounding that idea from the beginning. She's saying 83% of tax cuts go to the top 1%. Your paper itself found that to be not true, and so did the Auburn Pub paper, and so did factcheck.org. 83% of tax cuts would only go to the top 1% if in 2027 the individual tax cuts sunsetted, and that's not true. And I can tell you, from people working at Dinosaur Barbecue to people working in shops all across this area, people have seen a little bit more in their paycheck, and the tax cut's been spread out across the entire spectrum, and people are benefiting from it. There's no question about it, and there's no greater evidence of that than the fact that what you put in your paper yesterday, that 18-year low on unemployment in Central New York. 18 years. That is an amazing statistic, and we're just getting started. The economy is going at a 4% growth rate, which is well above what it needs to have a really serious impact going forward. So it's going great, and I've never and never will, despite all the scare tactics from my opponent trying to scare you to think that I'm going to cut Social Security and Medicare, I never will. I never will. And Mitch McConnell didn't say that either. What he said was, if we want to try and make this sustainable long term, Democrats and Republicans need to sit down together, like I do every time I'm working in Washington, and sit across the table and put aside the rhetoric and the heated scare tactics and try and make this a viable thing going forward. So Social Security is sustainable to 2032. Medicare is sustainable to at least 2026. If we make the changes now without the rhetoric and sit down and work across the aisle like I always do, we can fix it. There's no question about it.
Dana, quick chance to respond. Scare tactics and rhetoric, is that what this is?
No, absolutely not. And there are a few things here that I'd like to respond to. So it's true that unemployment is low, and that's a great thing. The problem is that people's jobs are not paying them enough, and that's because wages are stagnant. And the tax bill did nothing to help that. Most of the benefits do, in fact, go to the wealthy and corporations, and there are plenty of independent analyses that show that. And the larger problem is that what corporations did with the windfall of the taxes was not invest in jobs and wages for their employees. Instead, they used most of that money for stock buybacks, which is a tactic to make their shareholders wealthier. We need to see money go to working families. This tax bill does not do that. On top of which, it blows a $1.9 trillion hole in our deficit, voted for by a congressman who, when he ran the first time, said that adding to the debt is immoral. Well, he just added almost $2 trillion to the debt.
All right,
And
we're gonna move on there. John, just 30 seconds
Sure,
to respond
absolutely.
really quick,
Listen,
and then we're gonna
if
move
she
on
went
from
out
this.
and talked to people in the community, she would know. I talked to Dot Foods. They just invested $2 million in their facilities, and they're paying their people more. Kemper Matt over at Dupli Graphics put $1 million into their company. That's a story across this district. And IEC is getting ready to add 350 jobs and build a 200,000 square foot facility. Their growth is all across this district, and it's absolutely ridiculous to say that there's stock buybacks. It's not happening in the district. We're setting ourselves up well to compete on the long term, and unemployment rate is undeniably low.
Chris, I need to respond to
15
that.
seconds,
so
then we're going to move on.
I have been all across the district. I've been doing that throughout my campaign, talking to lots of folks, including people who disagree with me about the issues, which is something that you don't do. And I hear from plenty of people who are struggling in the face of this tax bill. And for you to suggest to them that your party is not using the debt as an excuse to go after Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security is absolutely misrepresenting what the leadership of your party in both houses have said.
There she goes with the scare tactics again. It doesn't work, folks, and don't fall for it.
Let's move on to the next topic here, Marie.
Yeah, well, since we started with Dana, well, this question goes to you, John.
Sure.
You have very different views on health care as well.
Absolutely.
You've consistently said that you would never vote to repeal the Affordable Care Act unless there was a ready replacement for it. But your yes vote on the tax cut also canceled the requirement for the individual mandate, which undermines the Affordable Care Act. And if Obamacare was such a bad idea, why hasn't this Republican president, this Republican House, this Republican Senate come up with a better one?
Well, first of all, I kept my word to my constituents, and I said from the beginning two things. Even before I was first elected, I said two things. And I'm very proud of it. I kept my word. I said, number one, I would never vote for repeal of the Affordable Care Act. And keep in mind, you want to talk about independence? That's the very first thing that President Trump wanted to do was repeal the Affordable Care Act. And I stood tall and voted against it. And I'm very proud that I wasn't intimidated by him or anybody in my party, and I never have been. And number two, I always said, the individual mandate in my mind was arguably unconstitutional because it says, you either buy insurance, young man and young woman, or we are going to fine you. That is
The Supreme Court said it was a tax. So
They said it was a tax. I don't believe it. That's just my fundamental thing. I said it from the beginning. So what happened when the Affordable Care Act got passed? When the Affordable Care Act got passed, initially back in the Obama era, they expected 17 or more million young people, because of the mandate, to get health insurance. Did millions more get it? Of course. Did anywhere near that number get it? No. And so that was a flawed principle from the beginning. They'd rather pay the fine than get the insurance. And without that money coming into the Affordable Care Act, it's going to struggle anyways.
So where's the better idea, John?
So the better idea is what I did with the Problem Solvers Caucus. It's it's 24 Democrats and 24 Republicans. We sent a proposal to the Senate to fix the individual markets that included cost savings reduction programs and price supports to keep insurance down. I've also said that I support medical malpractice reform, prescription drug price reform, interstate competition for health care, funding high-risk pools, and then, of course, what we did in the long term, which we've already done, and that's we've sent billions of dollars more to National Institutes of Health this year, and we are making progress in the last couple of years already. 3 to 5 years, it looks like, we may have a cure or at least a breakthrough with Alzheimer's that will have a long-term effect of saving literally trillions of dollars of health care for the next
I got to cut you
generation.
off there. Dana?
So the congressman promised us that he would not repeal without a replacement. And as you rightly pointed out, the tax bill was a backdoor way to do that. It gutted the ACA. And we've seen already some really dramatic results as a result of that vote. Premiums are going through the roof. our largest, you printed in your own paper, our largest insurer in this area asked for premium increases of 39% next year because of the repeal of that provision of the ACA. What's even more upsetting than that, and the fact that thousands of families are going to lose their insurance as a result, is that now, because of the taking away of that provision in the bill, 20 GOP-led states are suing the United States government, saying because that provision is there, the rest of the bill is no longer valid. And so they are threatening all of the provisions in the ACA that people depend on, the ability to stay on your parents' insurance till you're 29, the ban on discriminating against women and charging them higher prices, and most importantly, requiring protection for people with pre-existing conditions. That is now at risk because of this vote. And in our district alone, we have almost 300,000 adults under the age of 65 with pre-existing conditions who could be hurt by this. And that's an incredibly big problem. And the solutions that the congressman is offering don't work. High-risk pools is essentially what we had before the ACA, and it puts people who are expensive and difficult to insure in one pool and people who are inexpensive and easy to insure in the other pool. The folks over here end up getting charged so much for their coverage that they can't afford the care they need.
If I may,
John?
yeah,
Sure.
I may respond briefly. What she's saying is simply not true. I sat across the table from folks at Excellus Blue Cross Blue Shield. They insure more than 70% of the people in this district, in our district. 70%. They had a 3% hike in insurance this year. So she's pulling out the one carrier that has an increase, but not all of them are like that. In fact, that insurance has not been as bad. And really, what this is all about is her trying to justify her very extreme idea of having a complete government takeover of health care, and that would absolutely end Medicare as we know it.
That's
And
a good
so-
segue, because I was going to ask Dana about that. You support Medicare for all, Dana. The cost would increase the federal budget by $32 trillion over 10 years, according to the Mercatus study. Supporters say the savings will more than make up for that cost, but that's not a widely accepted or universally accepted notion. So is it a government takeover of healthcare?
It's not, and if you want to talk about scare tactics, there's a perfect one. The congressman is running ads suggesting that I am destroying Medicare as we know it with this plan, which couldn't be further from the truth. The point of this plan is to protect Medicare, improve it, and expand it to everybody. It will cost $32 trillion over the next 10 years, but our current healthcare system will cost $34 trillion over the next 10 years. Medicare for All saves us money, and 95% of households will save money under Medicare for All. Right now, families are completely overburdened with premiums, with deductibles, with co-pays, with drug costs. I talked to a man in Williamson when I had a town hall there who told me that he has health insurance, but he can't see a doctor because his deductible is $4,600. That is not sustainable. That man, although he has insurance, does not have health care. We need to make sure that every person in our district and across this country has health insurance and health care. And Medicare for All is the plan that will do it.
You worked your whole life, seniors, to pay into this system. Your whole life. And she's talking about saying you're going to save money by doubling the size of government overnight. Think about that. Doubling the size of government overnight, doubling every individual's taxes, doubling every business's tax. So if your business is paying 35% taxes, you're going to pay 70% now. Think about that. That would stop dead all the progress with our economic advances, and it would make and double the size of government overnight. So think about the concept of that. And on top of that, that's the rosiest scenario. The guy that wrote the Mercatus report called me after he saw some of her commercials and he said, here's what you need to know. That $32 trillion is under only the rosiest of scenarios. It's highly likely it'd be much more like 37 or 38 trillion, which in effect would not save you money. And it doesn't take into account that about 80% of hospitals in the first year, and this is in the report, and she didn't know it, and nobody else has, that 80% of the hospitals in the first year would be underwater. They would be taking a hit because the amount of money they get for reimbursements and medical costs would be 60% on the dollar instead of 100%. So because of that, a lot of these hospitals like Oswego Health and Auburn, they would be in real big trouble being able to even survive. It would be a disaster and would wreck Medicare as we know it. There's no doubt about it.
So again, we're talking scare tactics
Talking
and
facts.
a lot of misinformation to the voters. And I think that does the voters a real disservice. Healthcare is incredibly important and incredibly personal, and we owe them some honesty about it. And to suggest that the way to destroy Medicare is with more Medicare defies all logic. And You continue to characterize this position as extreme, but the fact of the matter is that the most recent polling on this issue, which comes out of Reuters, a nonpartisan news organization, shows that 70% of Americans and a majority of Republicans support Medicare for all. And that means that the extreme position on this issue is, in fact, yours, Congressman, to be against it.
I'll tell you what, I'll make a deal with you.
Real quick.
You decide whether or not doubling the size of the federal government overnight, and that's going to make things more efficient, and more than doubling the taxes for every American, and putting 80% of the hospitals at risk is a good thing. You decide.
We're going to cut you off here because we're going to move on to talking a little bit about ads in this campaign. We've seen a lot of negative advertising in this campaign, and each of you, I think, has sought to define the other in terms of policy and experience in some cases. We've heard Dana's job title used in a somewhat demeaning fashion. We've heard the phrase "shame on Katko" often. I want to give you each a chance to answer this question individually and respond to the other. How do you think your opponent's campaign has most distorted your image? Dana, we're going to start with you.
Well, I think the congressman has put out commercials that have sought to attack me personally, using a lot of false and misleading information, as your newspaper and The Citizen have both identified. I think the reason he's doing it is that he wants to distract from the issues and doesn't want to have an honest conversation about the issues because he knows he's on the wrong side of the issues. We are in a time of dirty tricks in politics. I know that voters are sick of it because they tell me all the time. I have kept the ads in my campaign. Everything that my campaign puts out is focused on the issues. It's focused on the decisions that the congressman has made as a congressman and as a candidate, which is what this campaign should be about. And he has chosen to take a different tactic. I think it's unfortunate. I think the voters deserve better.
John, I'd like you to respond to that, and then I'll ask you the same question.
Sure, yeah. I mean, listen, you can't have your cake and eat it too. She's put out ads, I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of dollars of ads, saying that 83% of the tax cuts go to the top 1%, and you guys yourselves said that that wasn't true, and so did every credible news organization. So I'm not talking about distorting the facts. I'm not going to get into a tit for tat on this, but the bottom line is she has distorted the facts to try and justify her wild positions about government takeover of healthcare and some of the other things she wants to do. She wants to tax us on many different ways, not just that. She wants to repeal the tax reform, which is a tax hike of colossal proportions in of itself, in addition to everything else.
So back to the same question to you then.
Sure.
How do you think your opponent has most distorted your image?
Well, I just, for one thing, she is desperately trying to say that somehow I voted with Trump 90% of the time, so therefore I'm a bad guy and you shouldn't vote for me because I'm in Trump's back pocket. What she ignores with that, and what you all should know, is that there's 100 members of the Senate and 435 members of the House. That's 535 people. I was found to be the 7th most bipartisan person of all of them. 7th. And 4 people above me are retiring, probably because they've had enough. But I've fought hard to be in the middle since the moment I got into Congress. I've kept my word to all of you regarding that. And you yourselves did an analysis of New York State congressional districts, all 26 of them, because one person passed away. And you yourselves found in your articles that I was the #1 most likely to break with my party. She's trying hard, desperately, to tie me to Donald Trump so that somehow, some way, she could get away from the fact that I'm one of the most bipartisan members of all in Congress. I'm the head of the independent wing of the Republican Party, 51 members. I'm the head of it. I'm a major player in the Problem Solvers Caucus, which is 24 Democrats and 24 Republicans. She wants to put all that in a toaster and have you forget about it because she wants to make sure that there's this image that somehow I'm a Trump lackey. I said no to Trump's very first bill. I said no to Trump when the Farm Bill was passed and won by 1 vote because it had cuts to SNAP benefits to working poor. I've stood up to him time again, and I have no problem doing it. She doesn't want you to know that, but I'm an independent person. That's all there is to it.
Congressman, I've never said that you were a bad guy, nor would I, because this is not personal, and I have made a point of not making this personal, something you have not chosen to do. Everything that I talk to the voters about, your 90% voting record with Trump, is true. And you tell us that you want to be considered independent from him, and yet you brought the Vice President, Mike Pence, to our district. You brought Ivanka Trump to our district. You brought Rick Perry to our district. You brought Linda McMahon to our district. You are literally standing with the Trump administration, in addition to voting with Donald Trump's agenda, which is anything but a moderate agenda. And you have done that more than 90% of the time. And that is information that the voters need, that they understand, and that they don't seem to be particularly happy about.
I have to respond to that because it's important. First of all, I'm one of the most bipartisan members of all of Congress. That is indisputable. Number one, I brought those people up here not for me. I brought them up for my constituents. Ivanka Trump came up here to help high school kids in the inner city with the PTAC program, which is going to help them get to college. And I'm not going to apologize for that. I'm not going to apologize for Vice President Pence going to Nucor Steel and meet with those workers there and to cheer them on and say this is great. I'm not going to apologize for Linda McMahon coming here as the head of the Small Business Administration to figure out how we can better work with small businesses. And I'm absolutely not going to apologize for Secretary Perry coming up here to help us and promote nuclear energy, which is clean, carbon-free emissions, in which several groups that endorsed her are trying to abolish.
One moment. So,
One final thought.
Mike Pence came here to do a $1,000 a plate fundraiser for you,
and when Rick
Perry came to visit, the administration acknowledged that that was a campaign event. So again, let's be honest with the voters about what's really
I'm
happening.
working with
Let's
my
move on to the
constituents,
next
and again,
topic
she's trying to pull you away from it. Don't fall for it.
All right, let's move on.
Grace?
I think it's John this time, right? Goes
Yes.
first?
I lost track.
Luckily, Chris is keeping track.
Okay, at least somebody is.
All right. We know that poverty in Syracuse is a big problem that we haven't solved, but here's a problem that we could solve. As we reported today in syracuse.com, 600 Syracuse children were poisoned by lead paint last year. The federal government eliminated a $3 million annual grant for the city lead program, which then had to close. What concrete steps will you take to address the lead poisoning crisis in our community?
I already have, and I've taken many of them. And first of all, point of clarification. In 2014, before I came in office, the city of Syracuse was decertified as a grant recipient for lead paint remediation because the program was mismanaged to such an extent that it basically they couldn't send in the money anymore. So what did I do when I got in office? I engaged as best I could with the previous administration, which was arguably difficult. But regardless, we supported all the grant applications going forward and are trying to get them back in a place where they can start receiving grants federally. We also plussed up this year to a tune of about $300 million HUD lead remediation programs nationwide. And in that proposal originally, they were set to cut some of those as part of the budget proposal. I advocated for them to be increased. And on top of that, I have to give a shout out to Joni Mahoney here because Joni Mahoney, as a county executive, knew the bad situation with the lead paint in the city. And so between discussions with her and I, she funneled a lot of the lead remediation she got back into the city to help them fill that gap. And I think that's great too. So we've done all that. We're going to continue to work with the city. And I have a great hope that working with Ben Walsh, whom I meet with on a regular basis, and with the county executive on a regular basis together, we have an excellent working relationship to work in a lead remediation program together and get them back into good graces with HUD. And I think he's going to be able to do that. We also, what you mentioned in the paper today was a really good point too. The city councilors can put more pressures on the landlords in the city to engage in lead remediation as part of their certification for rentals, and I think they need to do that too.
All right.
Can you say if you're reelected, we will get that HUD grant back and reinstitute
I could say it's the best possible chance now because it's so much easier working with Ben than his predecessor, and the working relationship is great, so I think we'll be able to get it back. I'm confident.
Dana, let's get you on this question.
Yeah, this is a huge problem for our city. I mean, the fact that we are poisoning our children, we have among the highest rates of lead poisoning in the entire country. It's appalling. And we've got to deal with it. And remediation is critically important. So I think the most important thing to do as a federal representative is not only advocate for extra funding, because we need a lot more funding than we've gotten in the past, to come here to help facilitate the application processes and work as a partner with local and county government to do that. I agree with the congressman on this issue. I think it is also really important for us to focus on the affordable housing issue more broadly so that there are more safe places for kids and families to live, and that's something that we need to push HUD to invest more in. Right now, HUD is working to cut back funding in affordable housing repair and construction, and that's the opposite direction that we need to go. And so I'm looking forward to being a partner with local government and a very vocal advocate for these issues at the federal level.
you had any conversations with Mayor Ben Walsh about this, just as a perspective?
I have, yep. I've sat down with the mayor and talked to him about a number of the issues that the city is facing. I was particularly interested in getting his perspective as it has changed from being a candidate and learning about the issues, and then being in office and what more he knows now. And
What do you
we've
mean by that? What's changed?
What's changed in his perspective in the issues now that he's on the inside
I
and
see.
he has access to all of the information and the players. And we've talked about how we can work as partners to help the city of Syracuse.
If I just may add to it, listen, I agree with her on this one. I think we're on the same page. And see, opponents can agree once in a while. The bottom line is, HUD has talked about trying to cut back some programs, but I was involved in the legislation not only for lead remediation, but to plus up funding for HUD housing overall this year. And we were able to plus it up by several $100 million, which is really important, because I agree with her. That's part of the problem in the city of Syracuse, is a lot of these homes were built prior to 1960 or 1961, and so new housing is going to solve the problem on its own.
The challenge with that, though, based on what I've read about the increase in funding, which an overall increase is a good thing, it didn't specifically go to the programs that the city of Syracuse needs the most, so we have to keep pushing
That's
on
my
that
job to
at the
advocate for
federal
that, and
level.
I'll do that.
Okay, let's move on.
Something we agree on. So let's move on now to a kind of breather here. Lightning round questions, where we're going to ask you a series of questions with either yes or no answers or one word or brief answers, and we'll just go
It's very hard
back
for me,
and
Chris.
forth. I'll make sure to help you both keep it brief. So
Is one-word answers?
one-word answers,
Yikes.
They're easy.
yes or no answers, or
Okay.
a single thought here. Dana, we're going to start with you, and we'll fire these off. What's your favorite thing to do at the state fair?
Visit the animals, hold the baby chicks.
John?
Eat
Eat what?
anything. I love it. I love the state fair. I love dinosaur barbecue. I
Brief.
love all those. I love
All right.
All right. John, what's the best concert you've ever seen?
Bruce Springsteen at Vernon Downs.
Dana?
Billy Joel at the Dome.
Okay.
Dana, should Brett Kavanaugh be on the Supreme Court right now?
No.
Yes.
John, of the 5 people running, who would make the best governor?
Mark Molinaro.
Dana?
Andrew Cuomo.
Dana, who has the best pizza in Central New York?
I was afraid of a question like this. I'm going to go with a Pizza Regionale.
Twin Trees, hands down.
Okay. John, would you swim in Onondaga Lake?
I did when I was 17 on a dare, and I kind of regret that.
Now, would you swim in Onondaga Lake?
Sure, of course.
Dana?
No.
Okay.
Last one, Dana, Syracuse Mets or Syracuse Chiefs?
I got to go with the classic Chiefs.
I love the Chiefs, but the Mets invest all the money in here. Got to go with the Mets now.
All right. Back to the
That
serious
wasn't too bad,
stuff.
was it?
That was fun.
All right, we're going to move on here. Talk about opioid epidemic. There was a recent ad. Sorry, who's this question going to? I think we're
I
back
think
to
it's
you,
starting
John.
with John.
All right. There was a recent ad from the Katko campaign suggesting Dana Balter won't be tough enough on drug dealers, which could lead to more deaths from opioid overdoses. John, do you believe that stricter punishments serve as a deterrent for drug dealers, and what should we be doing differently to fight this?
I was a federal organized crime prosecutor for 20 years before I came to Congress, and I've seen all manner of drugs come across the table. And when I started my career, it was on the southwest border in El Paso, Texas, on the front line going after cartel drug traffickers right across the border in Juarez, Mexico. And then I was sent to San Juan, Puerto Rico, where I saw the front-end violence and the abject violence. And I did the first death penalty eligible case in Puerto Rico's history, and included 8 homicides. I have a tremendous amount of experience of that in the last 16 years back here in Syracuse. I've seen every manner of drug known to man. The difference with heroin is that it is routinely lethal. By the time this is done, 5 more people in our country will have died from a heroin overdose. Try and fathom that, and it's getting worse. And so absolutely, it's an absolute epidemic. For people who routinely sell this poison in particular, knowing that it's going to kill several of their customers, are highly likely that it's going to. I think that more strict penalties for them can and will work. And maybe they'll start selling another drug because they have to sell the drug. But this is a lethal drug, and it needs to be addressed as such. That commercial didn't suggest anything. As all the commercial said was, number one, she was asked whether or not she need harsher drug penalties for drug dealers. And to her credit, she said, I believe there should be harsh penalties for drug dealers. But then they asked her, do you believe they need to be any harsher? And she said, I don't know if they need to be any harsher. That's her position, and we're very careful at saying that. We asked Dina X, who lost a daughter to a heroin overdose after some scumbag who overdosed himself on that drug a few days earlier and miraculously survived, sold her the same stuff after cajoling her for 12 hours. She was 5 months pregnant. Her reaction is what we put on that commercial.
Okay. Dana, he's talking about your position on harsher sentences.
Yeah, so it's another example of the congressman taking my words out of context and not sharing with the voters in the commercial what my entire statement was, which is that, of course, we should have harsh penalties for drug dealers. We need to remove the people from our communities who are harming our communities, and the opioid crisis is devastating in central and western New York, and we have to address that. Dealing with drug dealers is part of that. The other part of it is acknowledging that the opioid crisis is a medical issue. Opioid use disorder is an illness, and we have to treat it as such if we're actually going to solve this problem. That means we need to make sure that medical resources are available, that first responders have the resources they need, and most importantly, that everybody who suffers from opioid use disorder has access to medication-assisted treatment, which is the single best way we have to treat this illness. Right now, only about 20% of the people who need that have access to it. So this is a perfect place for the federal government to step in and make that available to everybody. We also need to hold responsible the pharmaceutical companies that helped create this problem in the first place through deceptive practices. And I'm concerned about the fact that the congressman has taken tens of thousands of dollars in contributions from those pharmaceutical companies. We need somebody who is going to stand up to them and hold them responsible.
John, I'll give you a chance to respond. But first, I just want to parse out a difference here. John was saying he thinks we need harsher penalties and that you don't. You said harsh penalties. Do you think the penalties that we have now need to be stricter or harsher?
I would have to review the code to see what the penalties are before I could make that kind of a determination.
Okay.
And that's exactly what we did in our commercial. Made sure we were absolutely accurate. So if you're worried about what you said, we'll post on our website tomorrow at johncackleforcongress.com. You can decide for yourself I'm being accurate. It's exactly what you just said here, and that's exactly what the commercial's about.
Yeah.
So, but we have spent literally billions of dollars in Congress. I'm very proud to have led the charge with that to get more money for treatment and prevention as well as law enforcement. I've been a leader in this field because I've engaged with my constituents, and I can tell you that we are making progress. Krauss Chemical Dependency, I have a very close relationship with them, and they are treating hundreds and hundreds of people at a time, and we're trying to get more money to these people, like Syracuse Behavioral Health as well, so they can have more treatment. I agree with you that treatment is the answer, but I just disagree with you. I don't think you can do enough for people who are basically accessory to murder by selling this stuff on the streets. Heroin is a lethal drug, and we should deal with the individuals that are selling these poisons in a very lethal manner. And the people that I talk to, especially the families who have died from this and lost loved ones from this, universally tell me that they think that there needs to be heavier penalties for that. And I think
John,
you'd be instructed to listen to them.
Let me just interject here. Would you go after drug companies?
Oh, absolutely.
What would you
in
do?
fact, we went after drug companies, but way back in the day, Purdue Pharma, when I was a federal prosecutor, got an $841 million fine because they were selling OxyContin, knowing that it was highly addictive and failed to disclose it. It was one of the biggest fines in the history of the Food and Drug Administration. I've been going after pharmaceuticals and from the beginning, and for you to suggest that would influence me with that money is absolutely patently ridiculous.
In the context of a $42 billion giveaway that those pharmaceutical companies got through the tax bill, an $841 million penalty isn't very punitive.
Oh, come on,
and
now,
we need to
that's
work a lot
ridiculous.
harder and hold those companies accountable. They profited off of helping to create this crisis, and now they are profiting off of helping to treat the crisis, and that's a real problem.
We are on them like white on rice, man. We are on them all the time in
Let's stop
Congress.
right
We
there.
pass an awful lot of legislation to go after them. We're going to continue to do
We'll
it.
move on from
All
this.
right. Next question. I think this goes to John, right?
No.
No?
Dana.
Whoops, I knew that was going to
That's why I'm here.
All right. A million
You're on
New
your game,
Yorkers. A million New Yorkers left for greener pastures over the past decade, and upstate cities like Syracuse lag the state and nation when it comes to jobs and the economy. Where do you see Central New York in 10 years? What gives you optimism for the future?
I have a lot of optimism for the future, but you've identified a real problem here. A lot of the economic growth that we've seen in other places hasn't quite made it to us enough, especially the city of Syracuse. We talked earlier about unemployment rate. The unemployment rate in the city of Syracuse is much higher than in the surrounding areas, so we still have a lot of work to do. I think that we've got a lot of potential opportunities for growth coming up, and two that I think are going to be sort of the biggest boom for our area. One is infrastructure. We've got tremendous infrastructure needs. We're all familiar with them. A bridge in Syracuse crumbled earlier this year. We all experience the frustration of pothole-filled streets after a tough winter. So there's a lot of work to do. Broadband in rural areas, replacing water infrastructure. And that comes with really good union jobs. And if we make sure that those are local hires so that that money and growth stays in our community, that's going to be a huge part of revitalizing our economy. The second piece that I'm really excited to work for in Washington is to make it possible for us to invest in a robust green economy here in central New York. I think given our very proud tradition of manufacturing, we are really well positioned to become leaders in green industry. We should be building parts for wind turbines and LED light bulbs. The fastest growing job in the country is solar panel installer. There is lots and lots of opportunity for great jobs that pay really well for people of all education levels. And that, I think, is how we're going to revitalize our economy here.
John.
All of what you said has merit, but you got to get the root cause of why we've lost so many jobs in upstate New York. Well before Dana moved to Syracuse, I was loading trucks at PNC Warehouse. It's gone. I used to ride share with an individual who worked at New Venture Gear. That's gone. I had friends and family members and individuals I know who worked at General Electric. That's all gone. And it's all gone because we tax the crap out of people here to death. And so her ideas are laudable, but if you take her ideas and if you don't say you've got to cut taxes here, Governor, like I've told him and I've fought with him about, and you've got to follow our lead and reduce taxes, we're not going anywhere. And on top of that, you've got to consider this. She wants to double your taxes for health care at a minimum. She wants to repeal the tax reform, which is jumpstarting our economy, having unemployment at an 18-year low. She wants a tax on your pension funds if they happen to invest in the stock market. She wants to have free education for everybody, and she wants a carbon fee, which is another carbon tax on your electric bills. Those types of things will destroy your good ideas by choking us to death with taxes. That's why we're 49th out of 50 states nationwide in business attractiveness, because we're taxed to death and regulated to death here. So while your ideas are good, you can't cut the legs off from your ideas by taxing us to death.
John, the question was about optimism.
Right, the optimism is by cutting taxes. You've got to cut taxes, and everything else. If you cut taxes and then you put in her ideas, it's a great idea. But if you increase taxes, you're going to choke it. There's a proposal right now in New York State to have government-run health care that would double the size of the budget in New York State overnight. They tried it in Vermont, it didn't work. They thought about it in California, and they said no way. And we're on the verge of having that here. There's a 12.
Let's
Those
stop there.
types of things are choking businesses
Okay,
right out
so
of New York State.
I have to say, yet again, the congressman is misrepresenting my positions and talking about all sorts of outrageous tax schemes that I am not supporting. But it's really interesting to me to hear you say that we need to lower taxes in New York when, again, the tax bill that you voted for included a little extra dose of punishment for New Yorkers who are paying high taxes by capping the state and local tax deductions. And it just doesn't make sense that as a representative from New York, you would support something like that if you were then going to turn around and make the argument that we are overburdened by taxes. Our constituents, the people here in this district, need you to stand up for them. They are New Yorkers, and you're not helping them. You're
I have
hurting
to
them.
respond briefly.
Sure.
90 to 95% of my constituents in my district are getting a tax cut of some way, shape, or form. That's a fact. You can talk to any accountant here that will tell you that's a fact. And we are not bankrupt in New York State. New York State had more tax revenue this year than last year because of the robust economy, due in large part to the tax cuts. And it's a fact that you want to repeal the tax reform. It's a fact that you want to double our taxes with Medicare for all or government-run health care. It's a fact that you said you want a tax on every transaction on Wall Street, and we could raise close to $1 trillion, and no one would even notice. That's absurd. And then it's a fact that you've said you want a carbon tax. That's a fact, and it's a fact that you said you want free education for everybody. And if you don't believe me, we'll post it on our website. You're on video and all that stuff.
Okay, if I can just kind of get back to the heart of this question, and I'm going to do this real brief because I do want to see. We asked, where do you see Central New York in 10 years? And we talked about a lot of things. Just single biggest change that you see 10 years from now in Central New York, and just please be brief, 15 seconds. But John, starting with you.
Manufacturing getting back here if the tax scheme continues, and the drone corridor producing all kinds of high-tech jobs. And I've been a huge supporter of the drone corridor from Rome to here, and we're doing a lot to get that.
All right, and Dana, single biggest change 10 years from now, Central New York.
I think we're going to see a lot of people who are growing up here staying here because of a booming economy and really great educational and cultural opportunities.
All right. Let's move on. We're going to kind of change up the format a little bit here. John, you've said that there's a lot we don't know about Dana, and that should give voters pause. Dana, you've said that John has refused to respond to or meet with constituents. So I want to give each of you an opportunity to get at what you'd like to know from the other
This will be
person.
interesting. I'm sure it'll be nice.
So I'm going to invite each of you to ask a question directly to your opponent. Take a moment, think about what you'd like to ask. While you do that, I'm going to give a shameless plug for our follow-up content to our debate. We have former Congressman Jim Walsh and Onondaga County Democratic Committee Chairwoman Pamela Hunter watching along with us. They'll be joining us afterwards for a post-debate panel to discuss their thoughts and reactions. So stick around a few minutes after we break here. We'll be back live with the two of them to discuss this. Now that you've had a moment to think about these, Dana, I believe it's nope.
I think it's
Sorry,
actually the
John.
congressman.
You were going to go first. Please ask a question directly of Dana, and we'll give each of you a chance.
It's been 6 or 8 weeks since the primary vote, and there's Governor Cuomo and the others that ran for the Democratic primary ticket. You refused to answer that. Can you just tell us who you voted for?
I haven't answered it, and the reason I haven't answered it is that I've said from the very beginning that I don't talk about who I vote for in primaries. I think it should be up to the voters, and after the fact, I don't want to divide the party. So I support whoever the voters choose. My pledge to them was that I would do whatever I could to help the person that they chose win office.
So, a quick comment. You were on my butt relentlessly before the presidential vote and asked me in advance to tell you who I was going to vote for. And I told you I didn't vote for Donald Trump, and I wrote to Nikki Haley. I think
That's
she
a
should.
general election.
Well, the same thing. If she can't tell you who she voted for, that's troubling.
Dana, your turn.
Interesting. So I wanted to ask you about, you're on the Transportation Committee and you work on airline security legislation. And you had a bill, I remember you talking about it, that you were very proud of, about the TSA PreCheck program. And then you, I believe it was the day before the markup, got thousands of dollars in contributions from the airline industry. And the very next day during markup, changed one of the major provisions of your own bill in the way that the airline industry wanted it to be changed. And I'd like you to explain to voters why you did that.
That is an outrageous statement. That is outrageous beyond belief. I have chaired the Transportation Security Administration since the moment I came into Congress, the oversight on Homeland Security. I've become one of the foremost leaders in all of Congress of keeping you safe while you fly. To think that I would somehow be influenced by something like that is ridiculous. I don't remember exactly what you're talking about, but I can tell you one thing. I've never been influenced by anybody in my life. And for you to say that, it smacks of desperation on your part.
How do you explain taking thousands of dollars in contributions and the very next day changing a provision in your own bill?
There's no way that was any connection between the two. And a lot of times when they make donations, I don't even know about them. And the same can be said for you. You received $430,000 from Nancy Pelosi's cronies in San Francisco, and you want me to tell us who you're going to vote for Speaker? I mean, come on. I mean, we can draw these things back and forth. It is an outrageous statement to think that somehow I am corrupted. If anyone thinks I'm corrupted, throw me out of office right now.
All right.
Dana, any final words, or we'll move on?
We're good.
Let's
All
move
right.
on. So it's been a bit contentious, this campaign. We've heard where you disagree. Can you tell us one thing that you admire about your opponent? And I think it's John's turn, or it's Dana's turn.
I think it's me
Doesn't
first
matter.
this
Go
time.
ahead.
Yes. So obviously we disagree on a lot of things, the congressman and I, particularly when it comes to policy. But one thing that I really admire about him is that he has devoted the majority of his adult life to public service. And I'm very grateful for that.
I admire her intellect. No question about it.
Okay.
Let's change gears again, talk about border security. We've heard a lot on the news about, call it what you want, but immigrants, migrants headed this way. John, we'll start with you. Do you think we need stronger security at the border, and what do you think we need to do?
Yes, I started my career on the border, in southwest border. In fact, my wife Robin and I, and Sean, who's 8 months old, is now 23. God. Would look out from where our apartment was, and we could see Mexico, and we could see people at night running across the border into the U.S. The border was an absolute sieve, and it's a huge national security issue. It still is today. We have to have security along the border, and I've advocated and been a leader on that in Congress. This caravan that's coming up is deeply troubling to me, and we need strong law enforcement at the border. I sympathize with them greatly. My heart bleeds for those people who want to come here to seek a better life for themselves and their families. But the fact of the matter is, if we don't secure the border, it is going to be a very, very unsafe thing for a long time to come. Every day I get briefed in secure facilities down in Washington about the terrorist threat. It is real. And every day the terrorists are probing their weaknesses to come into this country. And let's not forget, the heroin that's killing our kids is coming across that border. And the illegal aliens that are coming in and burdening our economy are coming across the border. So yes, my proposal would be to secure the border, also fix some immigration things within here, but also go back to those countries and figure out how we can work with those countries. And maybe the Secretary of State spend a little less time in the Middle East and a little more time in Central America helping those countries. But one thing you should know is my opponent supports the abolishing of ICE. She's been at rallies with her friends where they had, in July 31st of this year is the latest one, they want to abolish ICE. Here's what ICE does.
Sorry.
I do have to say this. Here's what ICE does. ICE is involved in child pornography, sex trafficking, human trafficking, securing the border, and securing drug trafficking.
I'd like to hear her position on ICE and on securing the border on the
Okay,
south.
so again, the congressman is trying to distort my positions. I don't support abolishing ICE. I've been
You
asked.
went to a rally there.
I have been asked about
ICE
it many
rally.
times in the press, and I've answered that question many times.
Wait a minute, you went to some
support.
ICE rally July 31st,
we'll
and
get-
there's pictures
I
of you at the
do
ICE
not
rally
support
supporting
abolishing
of
ICE, and I never have.
We'll post those pictures too.
So I think that in answer to your original question, of course we need to secure the border. Part of being a sovereign nation is having secure borders, being able to control who comes and goes from your country. We need to do that. I think that I'm concerned when we hear the way people are talking about this caravan coming up north. These are refugees. They are fleeing persecution and violence. And a really important part of our identity as a country is being a safe haven for refugees. It's something that's personally very important to me because my grandparents were refugees from the Holocaust, and they found safety here and were able to settle down in Rochester and raise a family, and that's how I got here. It's very important to me. And we have an asylum process in place already. So as these folks arrive, we've got a process to put them through to determine who has a legitimate claim to asylum, who can then come in, and who doesn't, who can be turned away. We need to use that process.
I need to respond briefly. Well after she declared as a
I'm sorry,
candidate.
Congressman, you had your chance. We've both gone through this. We're going to move on to the
Okay,
next topic.
all right.
Let me just follow up a little bit, though. You said we need to spend more money on Central America.
Sure.
Yesterday, the president said he wanted to cut foreign aid to Central America.
Totally disagree. He's trying to do that to try and get them to stop the people from coming. That may be a stick to use, but you need a carrot. The carrot's got to be getting down and engaging with them and trying to get them to solve some of their economic problems and their social inequities. We worry so much about the Middle East. Yes, that's a problem, but we need to get down there. And I think that Secretary of State needs to spend some time down there, period.
Do you have anything?
I agree with the congressman on that. We need to be spending more on foreign aid, not less. It's a national security issue, period.
No doubt.
All right. Well, I think we've neared the end of our questions. So we're going to give each of you an opportunity to make a closing statement. And I believe it's John's turn.
Yeah, she started, yes. Listen, this went very fast. I can't believe we're already done here. And I appreciate the spirited debate here. The bottom line is, when I went to Congress and left a job I loved as a federal prosecutor 4 years ago, it seems like 20 years ago, 4 years ago, I made a solemn promise to you that I would be one of the most bipartisan, independent members in all of Congress. And I would respectfully submit that I've done just that. I've gone there, I've reached across the aisle, and I've got a lot of things done. I'm one of the most bipartisan members of all of Congress, as you've heard, and this paper has backed it up with their analysis of my work within the state. I've had 33 bills pass the House, which is a remarkable amount of bills in my 4 years, 20 of them signed into law, a bunch of them by President Obama, and a bunch of them by President Trump. I work with anybody that's in the White House, and I'll do anything I can to make this country successful. And who's ever in the White House, whether I like them personally a lot or not, doesn't matter. I'm going to try and make them as successful as I can for the good of our constituents. We have a booming economy right now. Unemployment is at 18%, 18-year low in this district. Heck, I even think the Penguins at Burnett Park Zoo are happy about that. But the bottom line is, we are doing great as a country right now from an economic standpoint. We have a long way to go. We have poverty issues to handle here. We have law enforcement issues. I'm excited about all of them. And going forward, I'm going to keep doing everything I can. And this race really boils down to, have I kept my word to you? And I respectfully submit that I have.
Thank you, John. Dana.
Thank you. So I want to thank you so much for hosting this, Congressman. Thank you for participating. And again, thank all of you for watching. We have a lot of challenges here in our communities in central and western New York. I hear about them every day from voters. People are having trouble accessing health care. They are worried about the safety of their kids in their neighborhoods and worried about jobs that pay well enough to put food on their tables. And we need somebody in Congress who's going to stand up and fight to make those things better. The congressman has shown over and over again that he is working in other people's interests and not ours. He has taken almost $1 million in corporate PAC money, and you can draw a direct line from his corporate donations to his votes. He took over $60,000 from the telecom industry and then voted to let companies sell your private data. He took almost $100,000 from oil and gas companies and then voted to allow the dumping of coal ash in your streams. He took almost $50,000 from health insurance companies and almost $50,000 from Big Pharma and voted to gut health care. That's all the evidence you need to know that he works for them and not us. I'm asking you to vote for me on November 6th because I will be a different kind of representative. I will be a representative who shows up in your community, who listens to what you have to say, and then who goes to Washington and stands up for you. That's the kind of representative that we need here in central and western New York. So I want to remind you that Election Day is on Tuesday, November 6th from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. And I hope that each and every one of you take this opportunity to stand up, raise your voice, and demand the government that you deserve. Thank you.
And that'll do it for us. Be sure to watch our post-debate analysis show. Just hang with us for a few minutes and follow our coverage daily at syracuse.com and the Post-Standard. We're covering this race and many other local races that affect you. And as Dana said, we remind you that Election Day is Tuesday, November 6th. We want to thank the candidates for being here and for sharing their views with you, and we wish you a good night.